And here we are. So welcome everyone. I don't see new faces, so we shouldn't go over presentation this time. Thank you for joining. And it looks like people are adding new stuff when I'm speaking. So just a reminder that this is a recorded meeting and it will be available on YouTube quickly after the end of it. So be kind, and we have a code of conduct that you can read on our website. So let's start with Naham, that I think you have at least 2 items. So it's your turn. You can share your screen, I think, if you need, or
Okay. Yeah, I don't think I have anything I really need to show. So I had opened an issue a while back when just before I started at Equinix, actually, where I was experimenting with the sandbox with Vagrant and it didn't work. And I opened a ticket, and then eventually I ended up doing a sandbox using physical machines, and that worked fine. And I sort of forgot about it. Other people chimed in saying, yes, like I'm having the same problem. Yes, I'm having the same problem. And I guess Manny finally tripped over it as well. And he looks like he's tackled it. And I think later today we can hopefully get a PR that I think he found the bug and has the fix for it. But as when I first ran into it, I was on the outside of the project. Now that I'm really on the inside, it feels like a not great thing to have those experiences be bad for potential contributors. And I think step one is obviously fix the sandbox, but I wonder if we should make a bit more effort to exercise those pieces of documentation and the code to make sure that those things work for new users who want to get started, so that people have a good experience when they first try to use our project. And certainly, I mean, I suppose I am also willing to do some of that testing as well. Like if we, it seems like we should have, like the break was so long ago that it feels like we should have caught it. And maybe we should have some sort of, when stuff lands in the sandbox, that there's some, for certain kinds of issues, that we should really be exercising the code a little more thoroughly.
Yeah, I think as Gianluca mentioned in Slack earlier today, the master has been broken, I think, or was broken at some point. And I don't think we have good notification in general for things like that. And so maybe that just kind of slipped under the radar, and maybe kind of either kind of like at pull request times, or even with like GitHub Actions, right? We can do kind of cron style actions and tests, right? Maybe have like a kind of a schedule kind of run for tests in case there's anything like, git pulls or stuff like that, or apt-get updates, and that might break things. We can kind of be on top of them instead of kind of waiting for things to break or waiting for someone to come across it.
Yeah, I agree. We should also avoid the merge if something breaks. So I think there is an actual problem I see is that we have only one test that I wrote to mimic the hello world with Vagrant and VirtualBox. So the issue you opened, I think the one Jason had was rated to Vagrant and libvirt. So it's also possible, like it's very likely that it breaks because it's not tested. So we should have a test for that, or at least run the same test twice. So that's a possibility. And I mean, that's a great improvement. Another problem is that we run on a self-hosted runner for the Vagrant test because it requires nest virtualization, and it's a bit more, and for that reason we choose to not run all the all the pull requests against that test suite. So you have to specify that you want to run the Vagrant test suite when you open the pull request, or the maintainer has to do it because you need to add a label. So only the people who has rights can do it. And this was because we were scared that people would do bad stuff with our GitHub runner, and with all the with all the articles we see nowadays about people mining cryptocurrency, it doesn't sound something we should do. But this is an extra step that sometimes can be missed. So we see this CI is green, we merge it, and at the end, the Vagrant was broken, and we didn't figure it out only because we didn't run the test. So I think that the workflow has to be improved as well.
Is there a way that we can manually kick off those tests before merging stuff that touches certain areas and make that a require? Is there a way in GitHub to make it a required test that has to have passed, but that had to also have been manually triggered? Because that would be
so
ideal.
we can make it a branch protection required CI test run. It just doesn't run automatically, right? We won't be able to merge the pull request until that has passed, and that won't run until we apply the label. So there's still, there's that manual step of someone generally, hopefully, kind of reviewing the pull request and making sure nothing bad is happening, and then we can kick off the build off of our runner. I think that might be, and I don't think there's so many contributions to the sandbox where that might be a pain. So I think we can probably go with that unless something better comes up.
There was a change to GitHub Actions this week where they no longer run the CI jobs by default for first-time contributors. So we could probably just enable that job again, and then hopefully we're not getting recurring contributors deciding to mine cryptocurrencies. So.
They also don't provide secrets to forks. So that applies here, but if there's a contributors branch that they're making DAR from, the test just won't work.
Yeah, that's why Manny made a convoluted workflows that will run on many.
So hard. Not yet. I haven't finished that yet.
How many times would you say we make changes to the sandbox? I would say we don't do it that often. Maybe we require a manual test from one of the maintainers as a satisfaction for merging.
Yeah, technically, when I cut a release, I run the Vagrant, and I also made it to run. That's why I'm kind of sometimes, I think we just need to write more tests and have more test suites, because when I cut a release, I usually look for the Vagrant test and they try to run it on CI, and it wasn't failing. So even the test is broken, or it's not written in a good way. So the first stuff we can do is just to figure out how to write more tests. And also I tried with the help of Aman to write more tests, because right now, if you look at there is a Vagrant test somewhere in the code base, and it just run a set of commands that follows what the hello world guide tells you to do. So it's the same stuff. It was the quickest way to have a test covering something useful for the user. We tried to add more tests with different workflows, but Vagrant by its own doesn't, scale that well when it comes to multiple execution, because you can do that in parallel, and they tend to collide with each other. So overall, I don't think an end-to-end test suite for Sandbox can rely on Vagrant only. But definitely, if we support Vagrant as we support Terraform, we should be able to have end-to-end tests for those, at least for as a semaphore that something is broken.
As Gianluca mentioned, we did start with a few tests. I'm just sharing in PR, which opened up quite some time ago, and never ended up.
Yeah, it's still there because I can't get all of them running on CI reliably. They usually, for some reason, fails, and that's why I'm saying probably Vagrant as a framework is not the right one for running a long end-to-end test suite. But still, it's good to have one, because that's what we say people should use on the website. So we should be if we can test that in automation, that it sounds like a good addition. But it can be the only test as we have today. So definitely, if you have time and you want to spend some of it like figuring out how to write tests for Sandbox, that would be great. And
I see. Well, in Sandbox, at least I see we're using like the virtual box provider. I wonder if using libvirt is a better option, or if we had two runners, right, one for each, because we can't have both. I think they'll have conflicts on the same machine.
I think Gianluca did try this. I'm not absolutely sure, but I think we ran into a few issues with libvirt. I don't recall what would they, but I believe we did try libvirt.
I didn't.
Yeah, I think.
But as I said before, if we can at least run that twice, one of libvirt, that will be already another test and more.
Yeah, more inputs.
Yeah. So test coverage for Sandbox is definitely something that if we can work on, that would be great. For what Marky said, I definitely do all the possible tests I'm aware of when I cut a release. But as we know, there are so many ways to run binaries nowadays that it's kind of hard to cover them.
So I've just taken a couple notes of like, we should probably check to make sure that the tests actually work in the first place. And then we should look into potentially enforcing those tests before certain merges happen in that repo. So I'll probably look into some of that. I don't know exactly when or how much, but and if others have ideas, definitely something I think we should do. We should do better, but I think we've covered the topic to my satisfaction. Thank you all.
Yeah, I'm gonna add a description about what's the label and how to add it, because I probably not all of us are aware of it, but it's technically just you add a label, and from that point the pull request gets tested with the Vagrant integration test. But it's not ideal because you can always don't add the label, and I did that multiple times. So yeah, if you want to go with the next topic, applying metadata to crocodile images, Dan is not here, but he will watch the recording, I'm sure.
Yeah, and I've actually poked at this with Dan also. I've been working on trying to like use crocodile images in something that slightly more resembles a production use case, where you may want to like apply IP configuration or things like that. And mostly this was has anyone else done this, or am I like forging ahead? So the really hard one is like ESXi has its own horrible format on disk of like VFAT file systems containing tarballs of tarballs that inside contain config files. And like ideally, if we wanted to support that, if we wanted to build actions to tweak the config, you'd end up sort of having to mount the partitions, extract the tarballs, change the files, and write them back. But yeah, that's it mostly. If anyone else has worked on, and the other experiments I've done include just getting Hagel to have the right metadata in place so that Cloud Init behaves. If anyone has like useful notes on either ESXi, which is pipe dream, or just experiences with getting Hagel to present metadata that Cloud Init works with, I'm just interested in learning more if anyone has already done this work before me. So if anyone
without messing the image, right? You mean ideally, like having?
Yeah. So ideally without messing with the image, but in practice, my experience with bare metal is, if nothing else, there's going to be some machines that use TTYS0, and like just Linux alone, some machines use TTYS0 for their serial over LAN, and some use TTYS1. So I've kind of resigned myself to, I will have to mount up the root file system and tweak the grub config to change the kernel command line to deal with that. And I think that should be a relatively limited number of like variants on an action on a per, at worst on a per distro basis. But like the same action can do that. But aside from that, ideally, yeah, as minimal messing with images as possible, so that like people who make images that already work in multiple public clouds, that we could just continue using those images with Tinkerbell tooling really easily. So that doesn't necessarily have to be much discussion here. If people from the future, as Jeremy puts it, want to reach out to me on GitHub, please let me know what you find.
Yeah, I think for what I remember, I know that JSON and the CAP-T project relies on user Cloud Init to configure the loop action on the image. So in there you can probably find the format of the metadata, and there is an issue from Marcus probably mentioning that metadata is not super well documented. So we should probably improve that. So it's a known issue, let's say, let's put it that way. And about the grab you mentioned, I know that Kitra Basu from InfraCloud was working with Dan on a grab action to modification of it as part of the workflows. So I suppose that's the direction we can take. So you flash the raw image and you use the grab action to tweak the post installation accordingly with the server you are in. But I also had similar misfeeling when I tried to add NixOS to Crocodile, because NixOS forces you to declare the entire operating system before you actually flash it. So I was generating the NixOS image, raw image, using the QEMU module, but it was getting installed somewhere else. So it required an extra step that usually is fetch metadata. And like in the Equinix Metal NixOS image, there is a script that fetch metadata and combine that to the Nix configuration. So somehow it's a mechanism that we have to create or develop if we want to specialize images based on metadata server. That is probably what we want at some point. So I'm not sure if Dan worked or thought about it already, but it's definitely a good topic as well.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I was able to, even without a specialized grab action, I was able to, with a generic chroot action and a little bit of stead, make things work. So yeah, cool. All right, hopefully I will hear from other folks, and I'll reach out later about the if there's, you mentioned the CAP-T and some of the other stuff, that there's examples of the metadata format. I didn't see it in some of the other stuff I looked at, so maybe Jason, if you can send me at some point something where more of the metadata is fleshed out, that'd be very helpful. We have Dan.
Yeah, I can sync up with you on what we needed to do to actually get the metadata working, because there was like some particulars about certain fields needing to be defined for the data source to actually function properly and all that fun stuff. So I'll sync up with you after this.
That's it for me.
Next one is Manny with renaming the meeting.
Yeah, so this name, the meeting is still, I think, showing up for me as EMEA, Tinkerbell contributors meeting. And since we now only have one, I think let's just get rid of that. And I was gonna try that, but I got lost in the Google groups or calendar with internal Outlook and all that. So whoever
Manny,
else is better at that.
Were you just saying you
Yes.
wanted to change, you wanted to drop the EMEA wording?
Yeah.
Okay. I think I can
That's
do
it.
that right. I can do that right now.
Yeah. It's definitely not in anymore that we figured out that
Yeah.
time zones are not a problem. So
So that one's easy. And I guess I'll just jump into the other one. I think we were talking about last week. We were talking about like I think Jacob's proposal, and I think we were kind of confused internally, like about how to transition proposals through states. And I think Nahum kind of pointed us to was like the joint RFDs, Nahum. Which I think is kind of more in line with what we want, right? I think, especially with like Jacob mentioned this, right? That was really good wording, right? It's been proposed, therefore let's accept the proposal, and then we'll figure out if you want to enact it reword it or kind of, go in a different direction, right? But like, let's just merge the PR and then discuss it. And I think, especially now that since we're using GitHub Discussions maybe a little bit more, maybe GitHub Discussions is a better platform for this instead of just like a pull request. Maybe if we have multiple questions, we break them off into different groups or categories or whatever in discussions, and we kind of have things threaded or kind of better discussions, I think, as opposed to like GitHub pull requests be linear. So I meant to actually propose this earlier before this meeting, so that we can kind of discuss it. But I guess I'm just floating the idea out and I'll throw a proposal up so we can kind of go about it the right way. But yeah, if anybody thinks that's a bad idea, I'm happy to hear it now.
I definitely agree. We need to improve the current way because it doesn't work as we thought, or as I thought when I proposed it. If discussion can work, I mean, if you can elaborate the workflows you see more in a way that we can read it, I think that it would be a good start. But yeah, I agree. So we definitely need to make it better because we have too many stages proposal there that we don't know what to do. I mean, it was me pinging people, trying to move them forward, but it doesn't look sustainable long term. So yeah. And thank you, Marky. He updated the EMEA meeting, so now we are back in all together meeting. So Jacob, do you want to go next with the TLS support, with TLS discussion?
Yeah. So my agenda item is twofold in goal. One of them is to talk about TLS specifically, and the other one is to talk about GitHub discussion. So starting with TLS, if you haven't reviewed the discussion that's in there, I can give a quick overview. The question is, do we keep it? Do we not keep it? What do we do with it? There's been some discussion both ways. I wanted to bring it up because I think we should just make it toggleable because we know it's already in there now. If we could just enable it to be turned off, I think we could solve lots of worlds because I think it's helpful to be able to turn it off for local development, but also if you're going to put it in like Kubernetes, for example, you might not want to terminate TLS at Tinkerbell, right? At Tink server. You might want to terminate it at an ingress controller or something like that. But at the same token, right, Gianluca, you've brought up lots of good concerns about just security first, like you want to be able to enable that. So if someone's not running somewhere where they have external termination, you want to be able to terminate it within the service. I think that's great, and we have that, which is good, right? So I don't want to get rid of that because I think that's going in a bad direction. But I think the toggleable, being able to toggle it, might be really beneficial. That's the what I wanted to bring up and get thoughts or opinions.
Yeah, I think when I thought about removing it altogether, and I made a couple of pull requests that I closed with that. I think I don't like the idea to toggle it because I think the current implementation is not something I want to keep it as it is. I mean, it's good to have TLS, but it doesn't help us with, we can do it in a way that can help us identifying who is calling what and use that for authentication. Right now, it's more like we ship a certificate and that's it. But we can actually identify who calls the server, and from there, if we want to in the future build an authorized method, we can use that. So I don't know if you just word the idea to just remove it altogether and hope for a better implementation later, or if it's just my idea that what we have is not very good or useful.
I don't know if I'm following the idea of authentication, right? TLS doesn't have much to do with authentication because you could do authentication with or without it.
I think it's something like mutual TLS, right?
Yeah.
Oh, you're talking about mutual TLS.
Yeah, ideally
you can.
Ideally you can ship certificates that are tied to a field that you can use for identify who is calling. So ideally you can have a Tink worker, a way to identify Tink worker via TLS. So you know that it's actually a Tink worker calling you, or that is right now we don't have. It can be possible to use TLS to identify roles that has view only and that cannot push new hardware or whatever. So the way we do TLS today is very basic. It's like, okay, this is the certificate. We generate a few certificates, we ship them around, and that's it. Everybody that gets this certificate is can do whatever, because there is no mechanism to actually say, oh, this is a bad certificate. So let's do another one. So I don't know how much we want to toggle an implementation that is not super great versus remove it and just hope for a better one. Yeah, I see your hand.
I've used the Dominator project. It came out of Symantec. It's for imaging, which I used to manage bare metal machines. And it used certificates in that way for inter-service. The different services identified each other via those certificates. And then, yes, you could also have certificates for things like their agent would be probably the equivalent of our Tink worker. It's a little tricky in terms of like secrets management. If you really want to have basically in a data center full of machines, either you're generating a certificate per machine and then finding a way to ship that to it at boot time to get Tink worker to be able to authenticate, or you just sort of have one generic, like, oh, this is a moderately trusted endpoint that's probably a Tink worker, and it can do whatever it wants, whatever Tink workers are allowed to do, and not much more. But it's certainly a project we could look to for inspiration if we wanted to go to like lots of services identifying themselves with TLS certificates.
I personally think MTLS is a great idea, but I don't think we're ready for it as a project. I think we're too early and there's too much churn that it would add a lot of overhead that we're not ready for. And I personally say we're moving. I don't know if we're moving fast enough for everyone's liking as it is. This will not help to speed things up, in my opinion. If you add mutual TLS, it would make things pretty, depending on how we implement it, it could cause some serious friction, in my opinion. But I think it's something we should strive for. I think down the road, great idea, love it. In my opinion, might be a little early for it.
Yeah, ideally it shouldn't be, at least if we don't go too deep on, expiration of certificates and CA rollout or whatever. If we just go, the workflow will be not different compared with the one we have today. So we still have to generate certificates, bundle them for the to the server, and we have to pass them to the Tink worker, and that's already something we do. And we have to pass them to the client, and that's something we do already. So ideally, you just ship a different certificate. You just consume the certificates in a different way. So the workflow is the same. That's why I'm saying I don't know if we just want to remove that and forget about it until we do something. My question is, will Equinix Metal toggle it off today if you deploy that, or will it give it on?
That's a good question. I think James might be able to answer that, but like we run in Kubernetes right now, and ideally you want your ingress controller to be handling your TLS termination. But I don't know if we can do that because it's not something you can toggle on and off. Again, we're not talking authentication or mutual TLS at the moment right now. We are talking just straight. We need our endpoints encrypted, so traffic is encrypted. End of story, right? So, James, do you know if how we're doing TLS termination?
We would turn it off. We would do it in the ingress.
So my point is, can we just remove it and forget about it, and say if we want TLS, traffic is there, Nginx is there, figure it out. Because I don't see much value on the kind of TLS implementation we have today, because as you pointed out, it can be outsourced to whatever other proxy you can pick from the internet.
Yeah, I would suggest that we make a decision, a tentative decision to do exactly that. Just get rid of it for now. But I think we should put a poll to the community with a defined time limit and just see if anybody has any opposite feelings before.
Yeah, I mean, the discussion is there. You can react on it, do it, and from the noise. I mean, we always keep saying we should have the community, but this is the community meeting, and those are the faces that represent the community nowadays. So, you know, just say what you want, and let's take a decision. Like, the community won't come if we don't do anything. So
yeah,
right. And cold talks, right? So I'm sorry, go ahead, James.
I said if we're comfortable with that statement, then I say, yeah, let's move forward right now.
Yeah, I was going to just add that I think we're all in favor of just kind of getting rid of TLS, right? It'll make things a little easier for us, for all of us, in the short term especially. And if anybody wants it, code talks, pull requests welcome, and then we'll discuss it then. But in the meantime, let's just make our lives easier.
Yeah, I mean, I'm okay with that. I had the pull request there that I closed, so I will take. I'm always happy to remove code, so I will take it.
Awesome.
Can
I real quick, just as a last point to this, I would love, I don't know if this is a thing or if people are okay, but I really like the discussions, but I feel like they get stalled out a little bit. Maybe it might be beneficial to like at least bring them up occasionally in this meeting to keep them moving. Like, for example, there's another big one that I'm not going to bring up today, but the renaming of templates and stuff like that. I'd love to see some movement, regardless of whether it's what I, propose or not. But like, it's just kind of sat there. Unfortunately, I'd love to see it kind of get it going.
I definitely don't know. As we spoke like on Slack already, the final decision making here is kind of not yet defined to me, or it didn't show up like as clearly as I want. So yeah, I don't know. I don't have an answer yet, but I'm definitely, let's keep links coming and discuss them in the agenda and see how far they go and how clear the statement goes out. But as I say, like everything you see, issues, broadcast or discussion, if you think that you are if you feel like you're waiting for the community to jump in, you are the community. Just remember that. So just jump there and write what you want, because if we don't do that, the community won't spin up. So we, even if we are all Equinix Meta and whatever, we still are part of the Tinkerbell community, and we need to, make it happen.
Yeah, I think definitely add it. The agenda is editable. So I would say add it to if you have a topic that you bring up that you want to keep traction on, keep adding it to the agenda. And if you still feel like you're not getting it, then start putting it in the community Slack and we'll go that way. I do agree. I understand with what you're saying, and I completely agree. I think we just need to keep resurfacing it every meeting.
Awesome. Great. Appreciate all that. I'll do that. Thank you.
I already did. I've added the upcoming meeting blob to the doc and added that to the agenda. So it's already queued up for you.
So yeah, thank you for all of this discussion. Is great. So Dan, you have the last 2 items in the agenda, so the stage is yours.
Yeah, so these are just some ideas I've been kind of noodling with. So one would be actions that run in the host namespace, as opposed to building a VE, binding to the Docker bridge, getting an IP address, and effectively being completely isolated from the outside world. The main use case for this is a task that runs on a node that's being provisioned that we would like to connect to directly. So for instance, if we were running something or other that exposed a web service during the lifetime of the action, the only way to connect to that web service would be to modify the code to do port mapping, or to just bind to the host namespace where port 80 would be mapped to the default interface and things like that. I it's something that I have a couple of use cases for, but I'd like to see if anybody has any particular strong thoughts on that. In terms of code change, it would be change to the schema, and it would be a change to the Docker client part of things.
I guess maybe we'll talk afterwards. I want to hear your thoughts on that, on the things you've got that you're thinking to use it for. It kind of comes in along with one of the things that I want to dust off, like the HTTP services. I think is the proposal I called it. Where there's some sort of use cases like this, like running a service. Admittedly, it's not for running. I didn't envision it running it on the machine being provisioned. For it'd be on other worker nodes type of things. And so maybe we can kind of accomplish both tasks just with one thing. I do think though, Jacob, you might want to like show this off at some point. I don't know if you have, but with like our privileged mode that we have already, and like with the churu, and then if we bind up enough for like the right of the host machines, you could run services on like the host PID namespace and the host networking namespace and all that. And so you can kind of hack your way into it right now.
Yeah, they're not first class citizens like we would want them to be, but so it's doable.
Right, like I'm saying, it's doable now. And then I guess like it's also like along with like the HTTP services thing in general, right? Like it's just kind of like the worry of like maybe we're I don't want to like front load with too many concepts and like too many things that can kind of be confusing or that are like very specific cases, right? So
yeah, I mean, I don't want to expose the entirety of the Docker config to the outside world. It's mainly like the PID namespace, that was a need so that we could do all the reboots and the kexec stuff like that, because the syscalls didn't work. The net namespace is mainly me fiddling around. I just wondered if anybody had strong feelings. As I say, and as you mentioned, like I don't want to keep introducing every random Docker feature that there is. So it's a case of where do we draw the line, really?
I would say as long as they are, lack of a better word, container runtime agnostic, open it up, in my opinion, right? As long as we can, that feature is, available in all the different container runtimes, I think it's a great candidate to make available, right? When you start maybe getting to very specific pointed Docker command that you want to put in the schema or spec of the worker, that might be a challenge, right? Because then what happens when we move to container D or Kubernetes, or you run into problems there. But network seems pretty straightforward. I would vote in favor of it.
It's interesting you've mentioned moving to container D, actually, because that would basically by default move us to NetHost. So yeah, that's something to have to think about. Okay, cool.
I was just going to give it another sort of +1 to that, in that my understanding of the value proposition of Tinkerbell work actions is not as a security, like it's not, the advantage of using Docker containers is not for security, it's for convenience of packaging. And we should make it as easy as possible for those actions to do whatever they need to do to get machines provisioned or deprovisioned or whatever they're doing. So making it easier to use the network seems like a net win.
Well, I mean, we're all privileged and we can map anything into them anyway. So like I can just map docker.sock in there and it's kind of game over at this point.
Exactly.
Yeah, but I agree with Nahum. We definitely, don't enjoy the safety of containers when it comes to ThinkWorker. We just, we can physically burn a disk if we want to, for good reasons. I mean, that's what Tinkerbell is for. So,
cool.
You have the next one, I think.
Yep, my second and final one is this is mainly around, at the moment, the Tink Docker part of Hook has a Go routine, which will basically sit and watch the file system for a /reboot file that is being created by an action. When it sees that, it will then do a syscall reboot. But the way that that works is that the action succeeds because the reboot action writes that file to disk and then it ends before the reboot happens. So what I'm noodling is, I guess, a couple of different things. One is we either have actions that we don't care about the outcome of, which means that the workflow would succeed even in the event that an action fails. The alternative is that we can modify the Tink Docker process so that it has a socket or something or other that is exposed to the containers that are being ran as actions. And then an action can basically speak to that process and tell it what it needs it to do in a second or so. And then that action will succeed. Tink Docker that runs a Tink worker then will tidy itself up and reboot, syscall, kexec, power down, explode, melt, do whatever it needs to do.
Question. So you're talking about like an action, like a meta action, an action can call another endpoint that calls an action?
And so the way that they would work, so at the moment, for instance, the reboot action just does touch root reboot, at which point the Go routine in the actual hook OS will see that file being created, and then it will do a syscall reboot. And that allows the workflow to complete successfully. So my two thought trains processes are we kind of do something similar down that route, or we just have actions that I can do a kexec or a reboot or a power off action. And I don't need to worry about it ever coming back to me and saying I've rebooted successfully, because it never will do.
I think I want to go with the less convoluted implementation as possible. And I mean, if we place a field in the workflows saying like force success equals true, and the Tink worker will send the success notification before even running the action, and it will run the action, and the action at that point will be already a success. So the workflows will succeed. Yeah, that will probably be enough, because we will be able to, we have to accept that a few actions won't get a success even if they succeed, because reboot, kexec, like the kernel doesn't speak to enough for tell us what's happening. So I don't know, we can make Tink worker. I don't want to tie, like even the implementation that we have in Tink worker, it was good as a shortcut, but it's hard to explain. And ideally, if we want to make Tink worker something that can be, you know, even replaced or a commodity, it's very hard to say, oh, remember, you need to watch for the root file when you implement your own one, because it's a tricky feature with it. So at least at the beginning, and for the use case we have today, that is, we want to reboot and we don't care about, and we don't know if it will reboot or not. So let's just succeed early and see how it goes. But I don't know.
So two of those are not quite like the other. So reboot and power off, I agree. Like at some point, like there's no coming back from it, and you just have to assume it worked. Kexec has two phases of like the load and then the execute, and you'd love to know that the load succeeded before assuming that the exec is gonna work. So I don't know if we'd want to split kexec into. No, so the kexec minus L command is one phase, and then the actual reboot, the last little call, is a separate one. So theoretically, you could split kexec into two actions: the kexec load, which returns successfully, and then the kexec execute that has to whatever. And you could we could probably even reuse the same container in the silliest case. But yeah, I was actually on the flip side. I was going to say the number of use cases where we don't care about the return, or that we can't get the return back, feels pretty limited to like those power control things. And but I think I might be convinced by Gianluca's point of like, yeah, but maybe someone will come up with something, and if it's a simple way to implement it, then the simplicity pays off instead of being tied to the details of the fact that most of these revolve around power control.
Could
Yeah,
we take
I can-
advantage? Sorry, go ahead, man.
I can think of already like a case already, right, where I want something like that, which are the like the workflow services thing, right? Where like kind of by definition they don't hold up the execution for like the cases that I'm thinking of. And once again, it's like one of the things I'm going to be dusting off soon. But like the way that I had thought about that was, you know, like they don't stop the execution, right? So once maybe it fits, like once the actions all kind of complete, there's a workflow service that's running, and that one will do the actual reboot and all that. And so like it's not gonna block the execution or anything like that. But it might just kind of be too convoluted to it. It kind of, we can kind of use it to do what is happening today with like signaling to another container type of thing, or signaling to the root process. And so maybe it's a little bit better in that it doesn't kind of happen behind the scenes and you don't have to kind of know about it. But you know, it probably doesn't get rid of like the convolutedness of how to do these things. If we do want to do like, you know, allow, I think we might even like when we first were working on Tinkerbell stuff, we might have had like an allow failure kind of, you know, flag or something like that. That we might kind of, you know, repurpose, you know, conceptually for something like this. And then my, you know, my workflow service is just kind of, you know, you can think of it as always having that flag enabled anyway. So I don't know if that was a good third option or not, but I definitely do have like that kind of similar work case.
So just to add to that, initially the plan was to have something like depends on, so that we could say, okay, this action actually depends on another action, and we kind of make a chain. But those who do not have any kind of dependence, we don't really care about whether they failed or succeeded, and even report it to the provisioner or the server. Yeah.
And then we decided we don't want to do that.
Yeah.
But maybe we want to, so who knows?
Probably, yeah.
Go ahead, Jacob.
That's like trying to build out a graph, and that, I think that's solving a different challenge than what Dan originally brought up, was just ignoring the output of a command. I would propose that maybe we could glean some, and I think we do this a lot for a good reason. We could learn a lot from the Kubernetes community and explicitly define something like finalizers, and say, we will run these in order, and they just happen. You know, we could say very explicitly that this is what we do, and there it is, so that we don't convolute it to say like, or, you know, let people override it and like, oh, perfect, I can run an action at the beginning that is a service, and then it can run throughout the life cycle of my thing, when I think we already have on the roadmap to talk about explicitly calling things out like service or whatever, right? Like in the Kubernetes world, they have explicitly something called an init container, or hopefully soon to be sidecar containers or something like that, right? They have this idea of that already exists. Maybe we could commandeer some of those, you know, obviously massage them to our use case, but maybe some of those principles might work here for being explicit about what we want people to run in this section of actions or something like that.
Yeah, I think I lost, like I got lost in the discussion at some point. I don't know if I'm thinking about notifications. So let's say I want to, as a user or a crazy user, I want to send like Slack notification after each like workflows and after each action, but I don't care if it actually get delivered because it's just a notification. So can I mark a notification as just succeed all the time because I don't care, or is it because that's really like a couple of line changes in the think worker, and we have that.
You just made me miss events.
Yeah, I mean the example isn't great, but don't have to. I mean, we already merged like services and like the Dan point earlier, so I just want to try to get to a point that we can action on. So The easiest implementation I can think about is just succeed all the time. So we can, don't care about how it goes, and that's a feature. It's not, maybe the end one or the best one, but it's one more feature that you can use, and it's not too complicated to develop. So if we like that as a start, that's good. I don't think it will, change too drastically the worker. I see a lot of hands, so I'm thumbs up. So I'm gonna take it for accepted somehow. So yeah, we got the ends. There are new faces, so if Thomas, you want to say hello. I think you already joined before, but I know you now joined with a new vibe, so
I came in on the community hours guess maybe 2 months ago, but now I'll be working with Tinkerbell as part of my day job, so really excited about that.
Yes, we are excited as well to have you on board and trying to help us taking wise decisions overall. So
well, I think wise might be going a little far, but I'm hoping to at least ask the right stupid questions. So.
Thank you for that. So yeah, if everybody has anything to say, just jump in now, or we can call the meeting over.
I'll throw one last thing about the triage part. So very early in all of this, we decided we would give triage party a try. We never really formalized it or rolled it into what we did in this or any other set of meetings. But now we have the author in this meeting. And so I'm going to throw the config map away, and maybe with more officialness, something more can come out of that.
So this is the first I've heard that y'all are trying to use it. So before you throw that config map away, I'd love to see what you have and what you're trying to solve exactly. So
all right, I said I'll throw your way, not our way. Dig through your Kubernetes Slack history. I knew that we talked about this past.
Okay.
So we actually were using Triage Party last year, sometime around May to June or August, I believe, with Dan and Graham. We used to have Triage Party after every alternate Tuesday, and that's what led to Tinkerbell community meeting today. But we had
okay, good. Yeah, and so unfortunately, I lost my commit privileges by automatic system, or like by leaving Google for Triage Party. So I'll work on getting those back because we're due a release. But I'll check out these configs and see what we can do out of it. But maybe I'll check my Slack history, and I'm a little lazy about the Kubernetes Slack in the last couple of weeks. So but we'll sync up. Thanks.
So 3, 2, 1. See you in 2 weeks or whatever.
Cool, man.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.